Close your eyes for a second. Now imagine opening them again, and nothing changes. No streetlights. No glowing phone screen. No hallway light leaking under a door. No red standby dot blinking on a TV across the room. Just black. Total, complete, suffocating black. That was not a rare night. That was not a power outage. That was not camping. That was every single night, for every single human being, for over 300,000 years. Tonight, you will sleep with a phone beside you that can summon light in half a second. But for almost the entire history of our species, the sun went down, and the world simply disappeared. So here's the question nobody really asks. What did that actually feel like? Not was it dark. We know it was dark. But what did it do to the mind? To the body? To fear itself? What did people do with 12 straight hours of nothing but blackness, every single day, for their entire lives? Stay with me, because the answer is stranger and more human than you think. You've probably said it before. It was so dark I couldn't see my hand in front of my face. You didn't mean it literally, because you have never actually experienced that kind of darkness. Not really. Even your darkest bedroom right now is contaminated with light. A phone charger's LED. A sliver from a street lamp outside. The dim blue glow of a smoke detector. Your eyes, without you even noticing, are constantly sipping on tiny amounts of light. Before the 1800s, none of that existed. When the sun dropped below the horizon, it took almost everything with it. No moon on a cloudy night meant zero usable light. Not dim light. Not shadowy light. Nothing. Scientists call this scotopic darkness, a blackness so complete that your eyes, no matter how long you wait for them to adjust, simply have nothing to grab onto. Try to picture it. Not the movie version, where there's always some convenient moonbeam. Real, historical, absolute night. You put your hand an inch from your nose, you see nothing. Now ask yourself, how would you even walk to get water? This is where it gets interesting, because this wasn't a one-time inconvenience, this was every night. For your entire life, for your parents' entire lives, for every ancestor going back further than writing itself. And that raises a much bigger problem than most people ever consider. Here's something almost nobody calculates. In many parts of the world, especially in winter, the sun sets around 5 or 6 p.m. It doesn't rise again until 7 or 8 the next morning. That's not 8 hours of darkness, that's 14. 14 hours where you cannot read, cannot cook safely without risking fire, cannot travel without risking your ankle, or worse, your life, cannot see the face of the person next to you. Now do the math across a lifetime. If a person lived to be 60 years old before industrial lighting, they spent roughly 20 years of their life inside darkness, this complete. 20 years. Not asleep the whole time. No human being sleeps 14 hours a night, every night, forever. So what were they doing with the rest of it? This is the first real mystery. Because our modern brains assume the answer must be sleeping. But biology says otherwise. And once you start pulling on this thread, the entire picture of pre-electric life starts to unravel, in a way you didn't expect. Let's put you back into that world. The sun sets. You have no light source strong enough to read, sew, or work safely. So, like most households, you go still. You sit. Maybe you eat. Maybe you talk. And then, inevitably, you lie down. But here's the twist historians only piece together in the last few decades. You don't stay asleep. Multiple independent historical sources, court records, diaries, medical texts, folklore, describe something modern people find almost unbelievable. A two-part sleep. Historians call it first sleep and second sleep. People would fall asleep shortly after dark, sleep for 3 or 4 hours. Then, and this is the strange part, wake up. Not from a nightmare, not from noise, just wake up. In the pitch black, wide awake, in the middle of the night, for 1 or 2 hours. And they didn't panic about it. They didn't call it insomnia. It was simply what a night was. So what did people do during this hour of forced, dark wakefulness, alone with their thoughts, in a house with no light? This is where the story stops being about darkness and starts being about the human mind. Picture it with me. It's roughly 1 a.m. You wake up, not from anything. Your body simply decided it was time. The house is silent. Outside, there is no glow, no hum of traffic, no distant siren, just wind, maybe an animal, maybe absolute silence. You are lying in the dark, and you are completely, unavoidably alone with your own mind. What do? Records suggest people used this hour for extraordinarily human things. Quiet prayer, talking softly with a partner about the day, processing grief, interpreting dreams. Many cultures believed dreams during first sleep carried messages, and this waking hour was when you were supposed to sit with them and decode them. Some simply lay there, thinking, the way you might stare at a ceiling now at 3 a.m. unable to sleep. Except this wasn't an anomaly. It was scheduled, expected, normal. Then, after an hour or two, second sleep would come, and they'd drift off again until dawn. Here's an assumption almost everyone makes, that pre-electric people feared the dark because of monsters, demons, ghosts, superstition. That's backwards. The superstition came after the fear. The fear itself was rational, brutally rational. Without light, you cannot see a predator. You cannot see a cliff edge. You cannot see ice on a path, a snake in the grass, a fire that spread from a hearth, or another human being who means you harm. In total darkness, every single sense you rely on to survive, your eyes, simply switches off. Now think about what that does to a species that evolved as a daytime hunter. Humans have terrible night vision compared to almost every predator that historically hunted us. Our ancestors on the African savanna were vulnerable the second the sun went down. Lions, hyenas, and other nocturnal hunters could see far better in low light than we could. For hundreds of thousands of years, nightfall meant something extremely simple. You are now easy prey. That fear didn't disappear when humans built houses and cities, it just changed shape. The monster under the bed, the demon in the forest, the ghost on the road, these weren't irrational myths invented for fun. They were cultural memory of a very real, very ancient danger, dressed up in story form so it could be passed down and taken seriously. So when a child in 1600s Europe was terrified of what might be waiting in the dark hallway, they weren't being silly. They were echoing an instinct 300,000 years in the making. Which raises the next problem. If the outside world was this dangerous after dark, how did anyone dare to go outside at night at all? Because they had to. And this is where the story becomes about ingenuity. Humans are not a species that accepts a limitation quietly. And so, long before Edison, long before gas lamps, people were already at war with the night. The earliest weapon in that war was almost absurdly simple: fire. A burning branch. A torch dipped in animal fat. It doesn't sound like much, but consider what it actually did. It pushed the boundary of danger outward, by a few feet. It gave a traveler just enough warning to see a shape moving, a route to trip over, a drop-off in the road. Fire wasn't really about seeing, it was about buying seconds of warning. Then came the oil lamp, a wick soaking in animal fat or plant oil, producing a small, flickering flame. Then candles, made from tallow, rendered animal fat. Or for the wealthy, beeswax, which burned cleaner but cost far more. Here's the detail that changes how you think about all of this. Light was expensive, not inconvenient. Expensive. In many periods of history, a laborer might need to work for hours just to afford enough candlelight for one evening. Beeswax candles were a luxury item, sometimes taxed, sometimes reserved for churches and nobility. The poor often burned rushlights, dried reeds dipped in fat, which gave a dim, smoky, short-lived glow and had to be constantly replaced. Think about what that means. Light wasn't just about darkness versus brightness. It was about wealth versus poverty. A rich household could push back the night for hours. A poor household might have 30 minutes of usable light before the fat ran out, and then total darkness again, whether they were ready for it or not. This is the moment the story shifts from how did people survive the dark to something much bigger, how darkness quietly built the shape of society itself. If you were wealthy, night was an inconvenience. If you were poor, night was a wall. And that wall shaped everything. When you worked, when you traveled, when you married, when you could be robbed, and when you were safe. Cities figured this out fast. And with that realization came one of the strangest jobs in human history: the night watchman. Before police forces, before streetlights, cities like London and Paris employed men to walk the streets after dark, carrying a lantern and a bell or a horn. Their job wasn't really law enforcement, the way we think of it today. It was closer to a walking alarm system. They called out the hour, 12 o'clock and all's well. Partly to reassure people, and partly because a voice in the dark was one of the only ways to prove that someone was watching, that the night hadn't simply swallowed the town whole. Some cities went further. In the 1400s and 1500s, certain towns passed laws called curfews, a word that literally comes from the French couvre-feu, meaning cover the fire. Originally a fire safety measure to stop unattended flames from burning down wooden cities overnight, it evolved into something else entirely. A rule about who was allowed to exist outside after dark. Because here's the uncomfortable truth historians keep circling back to. Night wasn't just dangerous from predators or accidents anymore. It had become dangerous from other people. Without light, without witnesses, without the social pressure of being seen, crime didn't just happen at night. It thrived there. Robbery, assault, worse. The night became a kind of lawless zone, hiding in plain sight, right in the middle of otherwise civilized cities. Which means something remarkable. Before electric light, night wasn't just a time of day. It was almost a separate world, with its own dangers, its own economy, its own rules, and its own citizens, who were brave, desperate, or foolish enough to walk through it. So now the question becomes personal again. If you lived then, what would you have done differently? Would you have gone out that door after dark? Or stayed frozen inside, waiting for a sun that wouldn't return for 14 hours? Here's something almost nobody considers. Darkness didn't just remove sight, it amplified everything else. Without visual information, the brain compensates. It leans harder on sound, on smell, on touch, on memory. People who lived their whole lives without electric light likely developed a heightened relationship with their other senses after dark. Recognizing a spouse's footsteps, a dog's specific bark pattern, the creak of a particular floorboard, purely by ear, and they had to. Because in true darkness, sound was often the only early warning system available. Now imagine this: a wolf howl in the distance, a branch snapping outside the window, a stranger's cough on the road. Every single sound at night carried more weight, more meaning, more threat, because it was often the only information available. Now imagine this. This is likely part of why so many cultures, completely independent of one another, developed such rich oral traditions around night. Stories told by firelight, warnings whispered about what waits in the dark, songs sung specifically to keep spirits calm until morning. It wasn't just entertainment, it was psychological armor against 14 hours of sensory deprivation and real danger, night after night, for an entire lifetime. And this detail is the bridge to something much bigger than candles and curfews. Step back for a second. Really consider the scale of this. For roughly 300,000 years, every human being who ever lived experienced a daily, forced retreat into near-total sensory deprivation. Every night. No exceptions, until the very last sliver of human history. That's not a minor detail of daily life, that's a fundamental condition of what it meant to be human. And it likely shaped us in ways we're only beginning to understand. That two-part sleep we talked about earlier, first sleep, then a waking hour, then second sleep, may have given ancient humans something modern humans rarely get. Unstructured, undistracted time for the subconscious mind to process the day. No screens, no stimulation. Just the mind, alone, in the dark, digesting whatever had happened. Some researchers have wondered whether this rhythm was connected to lower reported rates of certain sleep disorders in pre-industrial societies, and whether the modern collapse of that two-part sleep pattern, squeezed into one unbroken 8-hour block by the demands of clocks and workdays, might be part of why so many of us now wake at 3 a.m., confused and anxious, having lost the cultural permission to simply lie there and think, the way our ancestors once did without a second thought. And the darkness itself may have shaped our psychology in another way. It built our tolerance for fear as a normal, manageable part of daily life. Children who grew up walking dark hallways with a single candle didn't experience total darkness as a rare traumatic event. They experienced it as Tuesday, as background, as something you learn to live inside of, the same way you learn to live inside cold winters or hot summers. Compare that to now. Many people today have never once experienced true, complete darkness. The kind with zero light pollution, zero screens, zero glow. And when they finally do, deep in a cave, or far out in the wilderness, the reaction is often startling. Disorientation, a racing heart, a primal discomfort that feels completely disproportionate to the actual danger. That reaction isn't weakness. It's an ancient alarm system, still fully wired, that simply never gets used anymore. For nearly all of human history, this was simply reality. Then, in a shockingly short window of time, everything changed. Gas street lighting began spreading through cities in the early 1800s. For the first time, entire streets, not just individual homes, could be pushed back against the dark. Then, by the end of that century, electric light arrived, and within a few short decades, it spread across the industrialized world with startling speed. And something remarkable happened that almost nobody predicted. Human behavior itself changed. Bedtime shifted later. Factories began running overnight shifts. Cities that once emptied and fell silent after dusk suddenly had nightlife. Theaters, cafes, streets full of people, all made possible by pushing back a darkness that had ruled human behavior for 250,000 years. In the span of about 100 years, a blink, on the time scale of human history, the second world of night, with its dangers, its rules, its silence, its watchmen and curfews, simply dissolved. We didn't conquer the dark. We erased the need to think about it at all. And that might be the strangest twist in this entire story. Here's the uncomfortable part. We gained safety. We gained productivity. We gained the ability to read a book at midnight, walk a city street at 2 a.m., work a night shift, watch a screen until our eyes finally give out from exhaustion, rather than the sun going down. But somewhere in that trade we lost something too. We lost the forced stillness of a 14-hour night with nothing to do but think, talk, and rest. We lost the waking hour in the middle of sleep that once felt sacred instead of broken. We lost a relationship with true darkness so complete that most people alive today have simply never experienced it. Not once, not for a single full night in their entire lives. And maybe, without realizing it, we lost a small piece of the fear that used to keep something in balance. A healthy respect for the unknown, for the limits of what we can control, for the fact that for most of history, humans were not the top of the food chain the second the sun went down. So, what did nights actually feel like before electric light? Not romantic. Not peaceful. The way we sometimes imagine candlelit history to be. They felt long. Genuinely physically long. 14 hours some winters, with no way to shorten them. They felt expensive. Every hour of usable light literally paid for in fat, wax, or wages. They felt fractured. Sleep broken deliberately into two halves, with a strange quiet hour of wakefulness sitting in the middle like a held breath. They felt dangerous. Not imagined danger, but the real ancient animal kind. The kind your body still remembers even if your mind has forgotten it. And they felt, more than anything else, unavoidable. There was no light switch, no override, no way to simply decide the dark didn't apply to you tonight. When the sun went down, the entire species, together, all at once, stepped into the same 14 hours of blackness, and had no choice but to find a way through it. They built fire, they built candles, they built watchmen and curfews, and folklore and songs. They built an entire second version of civilization, just to survive the hours when the first one went dark. And then, in barely a century, we made all of it disappear. Tonight, when you turn off your light and lie there in your bed, take one moment before you fall asleep. Really think about the silence, the dark, the nothing. And then remember that nothing you barely notice, that you conquer with a single switch, is the exact same darkness that shaped human fear, human sleep, human cities, and human survival for 300,000 years. You didn't defeat the night, you just forgot what it used to cost.